Bill, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. It's great to be with you. Again.
Yeah. I'm not sure everyone in this audience is aware of the fact that you're one of the few people in this world who have successfully negotiated a trade agreement with President Trump.
There you go.
Bill was Canada's finance minister from 2015 to 2020, and in that role you played a key part in the free trade agreement, the free trade talks with the United States and Mexico that produced the deal, at least referred to in the United States as the USMCA.
Yeah, we call it CUSMA in Canada. There you go.
Now, as we all know, dozens of countries are trying to cut deals with the United States and avoid the punishing tariffs that President Trump announced on Liberation Day. Your experience and your insights are extremely valuable in this moment. What should they be prepared for? What is the secret to facing off against the Trump administration?
Well, I wish I knew that secret, because there would be people coming to my door on a regular basis, obviously. My sense is you want to turn down the drama, first and foremost, and I think you see the current Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, trying to turn down the drama. You want to get to the facts as rapidly as you can. While I was there negotiating the steel and aluminum tariffs, number one, we got to the facts pretty quickly. And then you need to obviously get to the details. And the details are challenging in any trade agreement, and that will be what's challenging people right now. Obviously getting through issue by issue in a way that can hopefully get you to a more predictable situation.
The president leaves people with the impression that these deals can be cut over the weekend. You're making it clear there's a lot of hard work that has to follow whatever agreement in principle might be reached. How tough is it?
Well,
the USMCA, I'll call it that, was announced in 2018. It didn't get signed until 2020.
I think that's a good example. If you take a really narrow slice, when we were trying to negotiate the steel and aluminum tariffs, it took a year. We got to the conclusions relatively quickly of where this should land, but it takes a while to get through the details. And every trade agreement obviously has give and take. And so we hopefully should expect that people will get to some sort of the nature of an agreement rapidly, but I think we also need to expect that there'll be some continuing volatility.
For any two parties to negotiate effectively, trust is pretty critical, isn't it? I have to believe that you're going to honor the commitments that you make at the bargaining table, and you have to believe that I'm going to honor mine. That, of course, is how deals get done. I'm going to ask a deliberately provocative question. What if the party on the other side is a country with a president who keeps changing his mind, with a habit of not telling the truth, and clearly with little, if not no regard for the rules by which other people have agreed to abide? How do you negotiate with that country?
Look, it's difficult. All of us want to get to a rules-based system. A rules-based system allows for predictability, allows for investment. So that's the goal we're trying to achieve. And I'm hearing lots of people say that, if a deal can be abrogated, why bother? My answer is that you want to get to, as best you can, with as many partners as you can, whether it's with China, whether it's with other parts of the world, you want to get to some sort of situation where you understand what's in, what's out. And yes, it's more challenging with the United States right now. It certainly is something that we're going to have to deal with. I continue to believe that there's many, many people of good faith who are going to help us to work through that, and that we'll get to a more predictable situation. I don't discount your question, but I think for those of us who want to find a predictable situation, we have to have faith that we will get there.
And push forward.
And push forward as hard as you can with an understanding that there's going to be mutual benefit with the opportunity we see.
I made reference earlier today to the so-called taco trade, in part because it has worked out for investors so far. What if you're negotiating a trade deal? Is that something you need to keep in mind? Do you take Trump's threats seriously and cave, perhaps, quickly to the demands that the United States is making? Or do you wait and see and hope that circumstances force the president to, as it were, chicken out?
So my view would be you need to take the reality of the discussion seriously. You have to accept, I think, that the world constantly goes through changes, so renegotiations are not illegitimate. I mean, you want to find a way to create certainty for a long period of time. And I don't think it's reasonable to hope. You know, if you're leading a government, you need to actually work towards getting to a better outcome, accepting that the challenge is real.
Since taking office in January, President Trump has, and I'm going through this exhaustive list in part because I'm assuming that not everybody is familiar with what has happened to Canada. The president has levied tariffs on a wide range of Canadian imports: cars, trucks, steel, aluminum, even oil. He talks openly about turning Canada into the 51st state, and he has suggested that the United States can, should it want to, annex Canada by economic force. Bill, what exactly do you think Trump wants from Canada?
More.
More what, though?
You know, I wish I could answer that question, but my sense is more. That's what he wants. My expectation is that much of this is obviously posturing, that we're going to be in a situation where we're going to look towards, you know, a renegotiation that will include, you know, more access to Canadians' dairy, that we will ensure that we stand up and play our part with NATO, which Canada is doing. So that is the frame that certainly I start with. I think that's the frame that the Canadian negotiators start with. But I think the Canadian response, clearly Canadians are very frustrated by this. There's a real sense that we need to look for who are the other reliable partners that we have in the world. The US is our largest trading partner by a big margin. China is our second largest trading partner. It's not a surprise that Prime Minister Carney has started to look towards how can we have a more stable and expansive trading relationship with China and with other countries.
I'm very interested in the point about China, and I'll come back to it in a couple of minutes because I just want to pursue this dialogue that we're having about Canada's relationship with the United States. Prime Minister Carney has stated publicly that he doesn't consider the United States a reliable partner any longer. And he meant what he said. Now, I've given this some thought. If you think for a moment, any of you think for a moment about the long and productive history that these two countries have had, they've shared actually, right? Culturally, commercially, even militarily, to say that the United States is no longer a reliable partner is a profound thing. What will the new normal for Canada-US relations be?
Well, we're working towards making sure that we do have a reliable interchange between Canada and the United States. I mean, that is obviously the goal. The current situation is very volatile. So I think what Prime Minister Carney is reacting to is this constant set of changes that are going on. And he's also, let's be realistic, he's also a politician. Canadians are frustrated. So that frustration needs to be voiced. But I think you're seeing two things at the same time, appropriately. You're seeing him voicing the very legitimate concerns that Canada has with the changing situation, and you're seeing him quietly behind the scenes work towards getting back to normalcy to the best extent possible.
So let's get back for a moment to negotiating strategy. Canadians obviously have no interest in becoming the 51st state. They've said so in poll after poll after poll, and of course the Prime Minister has said the same thing. But it is arguably in Canada's best interests to restore as much tariff-free trade with the United States as possible, and also to remain inside the US security envelope. So going back to what you were saying about Trump wanting more from Canada, what should Canada be prepared to give up in exchange for that?
You know, I think from our perspective in Canada, what we see is that the advantages to both countries are significant from trade. Obviously, our automotive sector is completely interlinked.
It doesn't work without free trade.
It doesn't. Canada has enormous resources that are important not only for Canada, but for the United States, for the world. So I think it's getting to the situation where that is accepted and understood. I think the Trump administration is dealing with a set of issues that really don't relate to Canada. If you think about the immigration challenge and the hollowing out of the United States. So those are not really related to Canada, but Canada's getting caught in that dialogue in a way that is, I think, unfortunate. So the goal really is to get through this time, to get to a new normal. Hopefully, to the extent that there are tariffs that endure, that were not there before, which is, I think, deeply problematic, but maybe one of the outcomes, Canada would seek to be inside that tent.
The United States doesn't have Canada over a barrel quite the way it had Zelensky in Ukraine. But should Canada be thinking similarly? It is worth, in the interest of that longer-term relationship, signing agreements that effectively give America some kind of call on Canadian resources or perhaps Canadian fresh water, something that Americans have long coveted?
I would argue that that should not be the goal for Canada. I think we need to continue to be at the table to talk about the advantages that we have together, and changing the situation that's been advantageous for both countries is not something that we will do easily. Certainly, any discussion around fundamental changes to natural resources agreements, I think, is almost certainly off the table.
Let's go back to what you were saying about China. At the moment, Canada, at least up until 2025, Canada sent about 75% of its exports to the United States, and only something in the single digits to China. It varies, but let's call it 5% for argument's sake. How much more of Canada's exports could be going to China?
Well, I think the place you start with is the fact that there's actually been a bit of a pivot that's been going on. So what you've seen between 2019 and 2023 is an 8.2% increase annualized in agriculture. What you've seen with the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in Canada is that there's been significantly more oil that's going to China, significant recipient of Canadian oil. So if you look at March 2025, 353,000 barrels per day going to China. And March 25 was actually the lowest amount going to the United States in the last 2 years, about 3.1 million barrels. So there is a bit of a pivot. I think realistically, though, what Canada's objective will be to expand trade opportunities around the world. I mean, Mark Carney this weekend to the G7 has invited Prime Minister Modi of India. He's invited Crown Prince MBS from Saudi Arabia. He's invited the President of Mexico.
President Sheinbaum from Mexico, yes.
There's an agenda to be opening up trade and to find a way to have strong economic relationships around the world.
Sure, and or at least welcoming India to the table makes a ton of sense. It's 1.4 billion people. It's has tremendous economic promise. But most other places in the world do not, right? China is the world's second largest economy. Right. And there's a reason, perhaps, that Canada hasn't been doing more business with China, and that's because over the past several years, some concerns have arisen as to what the terms of trade and what the terms of commerce with China should be. In your mind, how do we balance the concerns over market access, over theft of intellectual property, over fairness, over things like dumping, with a desire to, at the very least, I say we, folks, I'm a Canadian, by the way, sell more agricultural commodities and oil to China?
I think what we hope is that we will find important opportunities in particular sectors, that we will mutually understand that there are places that are very difficult to trade. Each country will have some places where they don't want to go. If we can get to an agreement and understanding of what those places are, it allows for better advantage in other places. So that's certainly the hope. You hear people like, the Premier of Saskatchewan in Canada talking about the possibility for specific agreements against the agricultural sector. That's one potential path to actually increase the trading relationship. But I think the broader agenda is how do we make sure that we pivot? How do we make sure that we have economic relationships that are not impacted on a day-to-day basis by politics? Engagement doesn't equal endorsement, so working together is something that you should try to achieve, and that's the goal of countries that are trying to expand a rules-based trading system for the betterment of all of us.
As we've heard several times today, what the Chinese would really like is more access to American-made, for the most part, or at least American-designed and Taiwanese-made GPUs. We're operating. And when I say we, I'm referring specifically to the United States, Canada, Western allies under Jake Sullivan's small yard, high fence paradigm. Does that still make sense to you? Or in exchange for more access to the Chinese market, should, at the very least, Canada, which isn't much of a semiconductor maker, think differently about those kinds of security concerns?
I think we need to be realistic about geopolitical issues, and there will be security concerns. I think the Jake Sullivan idea, the small yard with a high fence, what you really want is to make that yard as small as reasonably possible, given the inevitable challenges, and the fence as impermeable as possible. So those two things go arm in arm. That, I think, is much more a US-China issue than a Canada-China issue, frankly. But as a member of NATO, Canada is going to be part of that realistic fence. So how do we make sure that we have a strong relationship that allows us to expand trade? I think by restricting the things that cause us consternation.
Now, one of the things that Canada would need in order to do more trade, at the very least in oil and energy in general, is more pipeline capacity. You referred to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and you were instrumental in a deal that actually brought ownership of the Trans Mountain Pipeline to the federal government in Canada. There are a number of options that the Prime Minister, Canadian premiers, and for that matter, Canadian oil companies are considering in the effort to try and expand that capacity. You could expand the Trans Mountain Pipeline, you could build a branch line off of Trans Mountain, or perhaps build a new pipeline through northern British Columbia to another port on the Pacific. What's the most realistic option in your mind?
I think the Canadian challenge with pipelines is not so dissimilar from other countries. Pipelines by definition go through multiple territories. So getting permits, it's always a challenge. In Canada, we've got different provinces, which was the problem with Trans Mountain. We have Indigenous groups with stakes to a lot of the land. So as you think about that, the north-south, the east-west pipelines are particularly challenging. They go through a lot of land. To the west coast or to the north are going to, by definition, be a little easier. I think that what really the current government needs to do is think about what are the big projects, and it's not just pipelines. What are the big projects that can give confidence to the business community, to investors in Canada and in other countries that we can start actually getting big things done? And so that is the challenge. You pick whether it's the pipeline or the electricity grid, you pick the one that has the highest probable success outcome, and you start pushing for that. And that's what I think the government's going to be doing.